Alright, so these are some of the little problems, and I think partly because the book is so ancient. It was written 3,500 years ago, and it has been passed down from age to age. You would expect some mistakes, but let me tell you that even if we expect certain mistakes because they had to copy by hand from one book to another, and over 3,500 years, some mistakes would have been made. Now, I want to assure you that the scholars have studied the Old Testament manuscripts and have come to the decision that what we have today in the Old Testament in the Hebrew language is substantially, in fact 95%, what it probably was originally. Okay, we get spelling errors, we get missing letters, we get maybe mixed up between brother-in-law and father-in-law and things like that. But generally speaking, all these differences between the different manuscripts, we have many thousands of manuscripts, and they compare, and the difference is not affecting the teaching. Yeah, whether the name is Jethro or Ruel doesn't matter, doesn't change the teaching, and so on. And it used to be the earliest Hebrew manuscript, that means in the original writing of the Old Testament that we have, was from the 10th century AD, I think around about 946. So there is this ancient manuscript, handwritten book called the Old Testament, and it's 10th century. That means it is the earliest Old Testament we have, and it looks like from the writing in 1500 BC all the way to the 10th century, which is 946 AD. There are many, many thousand years of passing from hand to hand, and maybe too many mistakes. This problem was resolved in 1947, and it was very interesting how this problem was resolved. See, we have, in terms of timeline, yeah, like this. This is 1,500 years ago. Sorry, 1,500 years ago, and Moses wrote it, and then Jesus is born, and 1,000 years later, we have this Old Testament that is the oldest version of the Old Testament we have. So many thousands of years, we don't have a copy. So we worry that, how much of this is exactly the same as this, right? What are the changes, and whether the changes are important. And there was no way we could find out. But in 1947, an Arab shepherd boy, he was playing in the desert near the Dead Sea, the Qumran caves. Okay, and he was getting very bored, shepherd boy, looking at the sheep outside. He goes into the cave, he takes up a stone, he throws a stone into the cave, and throws another stone, and then clang! Something broke in a cave out in the desert. So he went to explore, and then everybody get very excited. They all rushed down, all the scholars and all that, because they had discovered a library of books that had been hidden there from about 100 and maybe 130 BC, 130 years before Jesus Christ. BC. So now they have found something here. This is Jesus Christ. He was born. They have found something here. That's the Old Testament. So now they can compare this one and this one and see how much change.
So that zero has many documents, or just one or two?
Okay, in these caves, they found hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books. Some of them complete, some of them incomplete. The books of the Old Testament, they found hundreds of them. The book of the Old Testament they loved the most was the book of Isaiah. So there were many, many copies of Isaiah, and the copies were complete. So they took the complete version of the book of Isaiah and they compared it with the 10th century version, and they found out that there was something like 1% difference. 1,000 years apart, and only 1% difference. And it has to do with things like spelling. For example, Canadians will spell C-O-L-O-R and British C-O-L-O-U-R. In the Hebrew world, there are equivalents like that spelling.
Canadians the same. It's the American one that's.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Canadians are British, sorry.
Yeah.
So you have differences that are not really significant, and differences that do not change the theology, the teaching of the Bible. And only 1% after 1,000 years. Why? Because when the Hebrews copy the Word of God, they are very serious about it. They sit down, they count the number of letters. If it's wrong, they crush it, burn it, and they don't keep it. So because of the process of very carefully comparing and copying, they only make just 1% mistake from even though the two books are 1,000 years apart. So we can be just as confident that whatever we see today or whatever we see here, and there's so many thousands of manuscripts we can compare, we know where the errors are, human errors. And therefore we are pretty sure at the most we have only 5% loss in terms of changed words. And some of these problems may well be because of the change, right? For many thousands years of copying, father-in-law becomes son-in-law or whatever, or vice versa. Now, the other thing I want to mention is that, okay, you can look very hard at the old book like this and find a lot of problems with it. But the general message is what we want to study as Christians. We look at this book as it is now passed down to us by God's hand, and this version and this version basically the same. The new editions will have footnotes to tell you, okay, where there are differences. In the footnotes, you can study that. But the message is the same, and the story is not changed. And tonight the story is Moses was prepared by God for, 430 years before this in Genesis chapter 12, chapter 15. God had already told Abraham, I will give you the promised land. But for 430 years, your descendants will be in slavery, and then I will deliver them. And in Exodus chapter 2, God is beginning to deliver on his promise. So the book of Exodus has a lot of features. Okay, one of the things I want to do now is to help you see the comparison. Okay, we have Moses and we have Jesus. There are similarities and there are differences. Okay, the scholars would say that Moses was a type of Jesus. Type meaning a kind, a model. So Moses, in the way he did his work, in the way that God used him, was a type. Because when Jesus came, we see the similarities. So sometimes we use the word prototype. Proto means before. Prototype. And there are some differences, and I'll talk about them. So differences are called anti-type. Okay. First, easier to say, what are the similarities? One similarity is we have read when Moses was born, the king of Egypt had an order to kill all the baby boys. When Jesus is born, did something like that happen?
Yeah.
The king, this was Herod, this was Pharaoh. They had issued orders for babies to be killed. Different reasons, but there is that similarity. Okay, Herod was told there's a new king born. Of course, the new king will take over my place. So Herod was threatened. So he killed all the boys 2 years old and beneath, so that there won't be any threats. Pharaoh was just simply killing all Hebrew boys because he just feels that there are too many Hebrew boys, and therefore they will one day take over my kingdom. So similar fear in a way. Second similarity, we just read in Acts chapter 7, right? That his people rejected him. And in Exodus chapter 2, right, we see that also. When he went to the Hebrew people, his own Hebrew people, in verse 14, the man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Who gave you the power to decide what to do for me? Who made you my judge? Are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian?" So when Moses came to deliver his people, to save his people, he's the prince of Egypt still, and his people are the slaves, and he tries to save a slave from trouble from the Egyptian taskmaster, and he kills the Egyptian. And the next day the Hebrews said to him, "Who are you? Who gave you the right to do this?" And they probably were afraid, because if the Egyptian taskmaster is killed, the king will find out, the king will punish all the Hebrews, right? So probably this Hebrew says, "Who are you? You made me suffer, because now you kill the Egyptian, they will blame us and they will punish us even more. So who made you king over us?" So when Jesus came to the Jews, the same thing happened, right? Who are you? You say you're the Messiah? No, we don't think you're the Messiah. And they pinned him to the cross. They got rid of him. So you have rejection by the people, his people. Rejection by those he came to save. What else is a similarity between Moses and Jesus? Your miracles. Actually, this is going forward. We will come back to this. When Jesus fed the 5,000, he says, "I am the bread of life." Your fathers were in the desert. Moses gave them manna, bread from heaven. I give you bread from heaven. I am the bread of heaven. So Jesus claimed to be the bread. Moses gave bread. So in a way, similarity, in a way, different. So here is a greater person than Moses. Moses could only bring down bread from heaven. Jesus gave the bread because he is God. That is the difference. What else?
Moses wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. Jesus was in the desert for 40 years. I mean, for 40 days.
Only 3 years.
There's a bit of a similarity there, the desert years and the desert days. But it was a time of preparation. Not the later 40 years, the first 40 years. Moses, being a human being, he needed a longer time, right? To be humbled by God, to be taught by God. So Moses spent 40 years as a shepherd in the desert. Jesus spent 40 days in the desert preparing for his ministry. So 40 years to prepare for his ministry, 40 days to prepare for ministry, 40 years as a shepherd.
Yeah.
And what's the similarity? Jesus says, "I am the good shepherd." Okay? So there was this shepherd theme. And Moses was a shepherd of the people of God, and so is Jesus. And I mentioned earlier on the story of Moses is a person being drawn out of water. At the beginning of his life, the story is a drawing out of water. Was there a similarity in Jesus?
Baptism.
The baptism at the River Jordan. The baptism of Jesus. He was drawn out of water. When he went into the water, the Spirit of God landed on him like a dove, and the voice of God from heaven says, "You are my son. This is my beloved son." Yeah. So that is a similarity. Now, as we read, yes.
I wonder, some scholars have compared the Sermon on the Mount to giving the law on Mount Sinai. I could be similar.
That's a good point.
It's a very good point, but that's going forward.
Yeah,
Moses went on to Mount Sinai to get the 10 laws from God. Jesus was on the Sermon of the Mount. Remember the Mount of Olives? And there on the Mount of Olives, he gave the laws of Jesus. So
What is number 6?
6 is drawn out of water. Yeah, drawn out of water. To draw out of water, take out of water. He was taken out from the water. So Moses went to the mountain of God, Mount Sinai, to receive the 10 Commandments. Jesus went onto the Mount of Olives, a mountain, but then he delivered the law of God. So that, again, it will be a similarity and a difference. Because he is, just like this one here, he is a better shepherd. He is the giver of the law. Not like Moses, who was a transmitter of the law. Moses only received to transmit. Jesus says, "I am giving you this law." So he is the originator of the law itself. So a difference, an entity, at the same time a similarity. There will be many as we go forward. Just look out for them, okay? I want to move on to something else now. So you can see in future even more similarities coming up. One of the other things is, I mentioned earlier on too, Jesus says, he says, you have to be born of the water, born of the Spirit and born of the water. Water is what will be part of the process of salvation. And the Egyptians were chasing the Jews, and the Jews went through the Red Sea, and the Red Sea opened up. So they were saved through water also. Okay? Moses saved them through water. Now I just want now to concentrate again a little bit more on Moses. Remember Moses, he had a very big job to save his people from 430 years of slavery. So he needed to be the best person possible. And God made it possible. Pharaoh wanted to kill him, God preserved him. And Pharaoh wanted to, Pharaoh wanted to kill him, and he managed to escape. The irony is then Pharaoh paid for Moses' education. Yeah? So he was trained in the best place in the world. If you look at verse 1, chapter 2, verse 1, a man of the house of Levi married a Levite woman. We are told here that his ancestors, his parents, were from the family of Levi. The family of Levi eventually became the priests. So right from the beginning, even before the priestly system was set up, God already said, I want this man to be a pure Levite. Father, mother, both from Levi, and this is a Levite. So he was prepared from before he was born to be a priest of the people of God. He had the best university, the best education, and yet, okay, as I said, the king who wanted to kill him paid for his education. But more importantly, if you look at verse 7 and 8, okay, so Moses was in the river, hiding in the reeds. Then the princess saw him, and verse 7, Moses' sister was there, And Moses' sister asked the Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" And the princess says, "Yes, go." And the girl went and got the baby's mother. So Moses' mother was appointed to be the nurse and paid to look after the baby. Yeah? Verse 9, Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, took him back to Pharaoh's daughter. So probably she took the baby in, Moses in, and fed him till he was weaned. That means he was off the mother's milk, which in those days probably took about 3 years. In the 3 years, we don't wean our babies later anymore. Yeah? But in those 3 years, can you imagine the mother is teaching him, feeding him and teaching him. You are a Jew, you are a Hebrew, you are God's gift to us. So you have Moses, whose mother was paid to look after him, to teach him all the Hebrew things as far as possible, and then sent back to the princess to be protected by the king of Egypt, to be protected and taught and educated by the king of Egypt, who paid for everything. How nice. Now, the important thing here to see is that not only was Moses born in the right family to be a priest, he had the best education, he had a mother who taught him about his Hebrew heritage, and however, the first 40 years he would have been a spoiled brat. Everything he wants, he gets. So he would not have been a very good deliverer of the people of Israel because they were slaves. How can you, a prince, you live your whole life in the palace, know what I go through as a slave? You lead me, I don't know where you're going to lead me. I don't trust you. You're on the other side. So God had to send Moses into the desert and learn the hard way to be a leader of his people who are slaves. They had lived a rough life. You live a rough life too for 40 years. And out there in the desert, because God knows they're going to be 40 years in the desert, they need a leader who knows the desert very well, like the back of his hand. He doesn't need a GPS, he just looks at his hand. Look at the skies. So he spent 40 years in the desert for that reason. God was preparing him for his big, big role. He knows how to get food in the desert. He knows the paths to go. He knows the dangers. He knows where to avoid. So God had prepared him for his leadership in ways that he did not know. And being a softy after being a prince, now he was toughened. He's a shepherd and he's tough. And so he was ready to fight for justice. But look at his personality. Okay? He goes to his people and he tries to settle the quarrel. The next day he goes to another person, he tries to settle their quarrels too. He's trying to be their leader. But it's just him, because he goes to the desert, he sees these 7 girls being bullied by other shepherds. What does he do? He goes and saves them. Maybe he wants to be macho also, Yeah. But other than that, you see his personality, he's always looking for justice, to do justice. The girls are being bullied by the boys, I'm going to help the girls. So here, the personality, God had already prepared a person who would be looking for justice and perhaps a little bit courageous. Yeah, he's brave. Why? Because he's one man and he's fighting a whole group of shepherds who are bullying the girls. He must know that he's going to win, right? Or they will be scared of him and they'll run. So he was a little bit courageous, maybe, or maybe some would say foolhardy, stupid. But he was that kind of personality, yeah? And God needed to discipline him, strengthen him, and prepare him so that he will be a true leader of the people of God. So my message to you is that God prepares us for the job that he ultimately wants us to do. When we trust him and say, God, I know what I want to do, but you know better what I should do. Let me trust you to show me what you want me to do, because you have prepared me for that job and you will show me that job. And I can say at this point in my life, what I'm doing, I have gone through many years of preparation before I'm here. So God knows best. If you let Him do it, He will show you the way. Now, one last thing I want to talk about, and that is what we can learn from this chapter of Exodus. Remember in chapter 1, Pharaoh grows afraid of the Hebrews and he starts to cut down the numbers, right? So he tells the the midwives, please, can you please kill the boys when they're born? And the midwives say, sorry, you know, they were born before I could do anything. So then he decided to tell all the families of Egypt to do it, yeah, in verse 21. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of 22. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people, not just to the midwives now. All his people, every boy that is born, you must throw into the Nile, but every girl must live. So he wasn't afraid of the girls, yeah? He was only afraid of the guys. Now you look at the irony of it. Who disobeyed him first? The two midwives, Shipra and Puah. Two midwives, two ladies. Who else disobeyed him?
His daughter.
Yeah.
Princess.
His daughter disobeyed him. The princess took in a Hebrew boy. She knew it was a Hebrew boy, and she took him in. The princess disobeyed her own father. Who else disobeyed him? Who did not kill her baby when he was born?
Moses' mother.
Moses' mother. She says, I'm not going to kill this baby. I'm going to feed him till he's 3 months old and then put him into the river, and hopefully somebody will find him, right? And save him.
Oh, his sister.
And his sister. Because his sister is looking and to make sure, she keeps a distance to make sure he's safe. And then when the princess goes near, she goes nearer. Oh, I know the mother. Oh, no, I know who to look after him. Yeah? So we have all these women. The two midwives, princess, mother of Moses, sister of Moses, 5 women who messed up the king's plan.
Wow.
So one of the things I want you to realize is the Bible is never against women. In fact, some of the cleverest people are women. If we look at the life of Jesus, Matthew chapter 1, the same message is there. When you look at a genealogy, that means a family tree of a Jewish family, and maybe even a Chinese or Japanese family, the family tree is all men. Men. But you look at the family tree of Jesus, which is Matthew chapter 1, there are 4 women. Matthew chapter 1 verse 3, whose mother was Tamar. That's one woman. And you go further down, another mother is mentioned, Rahab. Verse 5, Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. So 2 women. And then you go down, David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Who's that? Bathsheba. So 3 women. And then as you go further down, who's the 4th woman?
He missed Ruth.
You made
I missed Ruth, yes. Ruth, okay? The Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. So 4 women. Actually, there was a 5th woman too. It was the 5th one. Mary, the mother of Jesus. She faced humiliation because they accused her of being, pregnant before her marriage, and therefore the child is illegitimate and so on. So they accused her of being promiscuous. So we have 5 faithful and brave women in the lineage of Jesus. Never let anyone convince you that the Bible is anti-woman. Never let anyone convince you that the Bible speaks things that women should rebel against. No. There are heroes, heroines in the Bible, and they all have great things. They saved Moses. They saved Jesus.
And 2 of the women are not really upstanding women in their time, but because of their faith and what they did to God's people, they are in the genealogy.
That's right. Rahab was a prostitute. Yeah? And Tamar She got pregnant because she pretended to be a prostitute. And her father-in-law impregnated her. So
And
father-in-law,
here I
And here are his wives, the three of them, yeah.
and then Uriah's wife was an adulterer. So you can have very bad past. God doesn't care about the past. God says to even the women with a past, I don't care about the past. But if you don't have a past, even better still, God says, I care for you because women are made in the image of God too. And that goes all the way to Genesis chapter 1. Women are made in the image of God, just as men. So, like I said, never let anyone tell you that the Bible is anti-women and you must rebel against it. Of course, we accept that the Jewish culture was a very patriarchal culture, very man-oriented, as most cultures would be at that time. But God is above culture, and God does not accept that women are lesser people who can do lesser things. In fact, as you can see from Exodus, they were the ones who outsmarted the Pharaoh, the man.